All right, everyone. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock noon in Dayton, Ohio, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today titled Shape Your Criticism as a Conversation. I am privileged and pleased to be joined by Dr. Deborah Bright, and we're going to work through this together. We deliberately did not over-rehearse, so we didn't want to come across as a canned presentation, so that may or may not have been a bright idea, if you excuse the pun, but we'll give it our best shot and see what happens. Dr. Bright is founder and president of Bright Enterprises, which is a consulting firm devoted to enhancing performance. She's done consulting with Raytheon, Disney, Marriott, General Electric, Chase, Morgan Stanley, and many, many others. And she's also a best-selling author. And Deb, you'll notice that between last night and this morning, I put a copy of your book cover on here because it's her latest, titled The Truth Doesn't Have to Hurt. And the reason I put that on here is, number one, all of you might want to get a copy, and we'll talk more about that towards the end because I put it on the last slide also. But the book is based on a 7-year national study that Deb has conducted in collaboration with New York Presbyterian Medical Center and Cornell Medical Center. And the study focused on criticism and found it to be one of the top 10 greatest producers of stress in the workplace, whether you're giving it or whether you're receiving it. So Deb knows what she's talking about. This subject is of great interest to her. So I'm going to ask her to say hello and tell you a little bit about herself.
Well, good morning, and I'm really glad to join Steve and all of you as part of our webinar with the topic of dealing with criticism, because what's exciting about criticism and what I guess makes me so passionate about this subject is because it's a skill set that doesn't just limit itself to the workplace, because it applies to one's personal life as well. And what got me interested in this subject, I know you see this slide though of moving me from New York City to Tucson. And I know, Steve, you want me to tell a little bit about myself. And I guess maybe that's a good place to pick up, because when I lived in New York, I had the business there for about 23 years, Bright Enterprises, and what we do and what we're devoted to is helping individuals and teams enhance performance. And so by that, I coach executives around the country, and I also design workshops and presentations, so I speak professionally to a number of audiences. Some of the companies you mentioned are my clients. And we're known for a number of skills to help people to be able to enhance the performance of others, and that's where the subject area of criticism comes in. And it has nothing to do with my moving to Tucson. I have West Coast clients, I work nationally, and so we found the weather in Tucson to be delightful, and it's easy to get out of Tucson because of the weather and to go West Coast as well as East Coast. And the real truth, Steve, is that my husband wanted to play golf, and it's really hard to play golf all the time in New York City, so we moved to Tucson.
Well, that's as good an excuse as I can think of.
Yeah.
All right. As some of you know, because you participated in it, last year, Deb conducted a study. And she didn't do this out of the blue. It was as part of her ongoing research on the subject of criticism. But Deb and I have known each other for so long, we don't even remember how we met. So I thought about just making up some big lie and asking her to agree to it, and no one would ever know the difference. But I wasn't sure I could come up with a big one and a big fat one that anybody would believe. So we'll just not go there. But in 2015, Deb contacted me and said she was continuing her research and criticism, and said, you know, I would love to do a survey among your NMA members. And we chatted a bit, and off she went. You want to chat a little bit about that?
Right. Well, what got me excited about wanting to involve NMA is that we had previously done a global study of women who serve on boards in major companies around the world. And in that national survey of over 3,000 members, we found that 79% of board members agreed that they needed training on how to give and receive criticism. So that caught my attention. And then what really amazed me was that 50% had no formal training. I mean, these are women who are top executives. And they have, and 50% of them, Steve, said that they had no formal training on how to give or receive criticism. And then they saw that there was tremendous value. I mean, almost 90% said that they see the real value in criticism. So I wanted to know what managers thought within organizations, and NMA reaches so many people. And so that's the reason I contacted you. And once again, the findings amazed us.
And we're going to share some of those with our audience. I want to give Deb her due. I was excited that after we'd done this study, and I know a lot of you got many reminders from me. You know, if you haven't signed on yet, please do, and we'll keep you abreast of what happens. And of course, we hear that from a lot of people that do studies. You never hear from them again. Well, don't want that to happen here. So I was really excited when in January, Deb shared with me that she actually got published in the Harvard Business Review with a great article, and a lot of which we'll cover here today, called How to Deliver Criticism So Employees Pay Attention. I know Deb has also got some feelers out with some other publications right now, right?
Absolutely, because this is such an essential topic. We talk about being authentic and transparent. Well, criticism fits right in that topic.
So let's jump into the topic. When Deb and I first started talking about actually doing a webinar, I still have my notes from that phone conversation, and she said, well, you know, Steve, it is the role of a manager and a leader to give criticism. There's no escaping it. There's nothing they can do to avoid it, and you're not much of a leader or a manager if you do avoid it. So I decided that I would use that visual as our kickoff slide for this topic as we launch into the role of the manager. Anything you want to add there, or shall we just move on?
Well, thanks, Steve. I think if you think about it, what makes a great leader is that they utilize the resources of their people wisely. And one way to do it is to delegate. Well, after delegating tasks, you know, we've all learned you only get what you inspect, not what you expect. Well, when you inspect, you're either going to give someone feedback in the form of praise, or you're going to give them some criticism. And so that's where Steve is saying it's inescapable. The other thing is, if we're really dedicated to developing our people, we know that people operate with blind spots. And we know that many employees come into your departments because they're interested in learning and growing. So to have that stage set like that, it says that criticism is an integral and essential role of a leader. Yet remember, at least with those women executives, very few of them have had training. And as you'll learn from our NMA survey, the same holds true for our NMA members.
That sort of gets us into asking the question, so what is criticism? And when Deb and I first talked about that, she said, well, you know, Steve, dictionaries do a terrible job defining criticism. And I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, there's just a lot of misunderstanding out there. So I'm going to let Deb be the expert in the room and let her define criticism.
Thanks, Steve. And then with the slides that are coming up, we're going to kind of, like an onion, start to peel it apart, because criticism can be very, very destructive. I think there was a study done years ago from Polytech Institute, and that said that one bad criticism exchange can destroy a working relationship from that point forward. And Steve, when I read those findings, I thought, oh my gosh, that's really dramatic. But if all of us just take a moment and think about relationships that have soured, I'll bet you many of us can, when you start thinking about what led to the relationship deteriorating, criticism could have played a part. And in most cases, it does. And so criticism used poorly is very destructive. It can rattle somebody's self-confidence. And it doesn't matter what level you are in an organization. And so even though we are communicating some degree of negativity to another person, we want to make sure, and what we're going to promote throughout this webinar is the idea that we're trying to deliver helpful criticism. And that's going to be a skill for a lot of our managers.
I know I look at criticism as just part of a feedback continuum. And if you think about it, we all get and give criticism all day long, positive, negative, sometimes verbally, certainly nonverbal. We all give nonverbal signs. Sometimes that feedback is qualitative, other times it's quantitative. Sometimes it's written. In my earlier discussions with Deb, she said, well, you know, feedback and criticism are frequently used interchangeably. The words are used interchangeably, but that's a mistake. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Well, yeah, because again, in our attempt to understand criticism, see, a lot of people want to use feedback. And where we run into trouble is that feedback is simply giving feedback. It's telling somebody something, but with criticism, it's more powerful. When we give criticism, we're going to be bringing up something negative to another individual, whether, as you said, it's subjective or objective. And its intent, though, is to bring about a change in behavior. And if the receiver doesn't change their behavior, then real or imagined consequences can occur. So when we say feedback, oftentimes what happens is the employee doesn't make any change, and the manager comes back and says, why didn't you do what I asked you to do? I told you that this is not correct, or you need to make some changes. And the employee said, oh, I'm sorry. I just thought you were giving me feedback. So they're not the same. However, Steve, we want to be realistic. I could just imagine, you know, some of the managers who are watching today, if they go back to their employees and say, listen, I'm going to give you some criticism. I mean, some of the employees may drop, you know, right down on the floor in shock. I mean, you know, in fear, because criticism doesn't have the best reputation in business and industry. And so, you know, so it's the idea that we use feedback to soften our attempt to open up the conversation. But keep in mind, they're not the same.
And I just think that's really, really helpful information. I went ahead and threw the next slide up because I know when I did this, Deb kind of looked at me cross-eyed and I said, hey, there's an elephant in the room in many organizations. The thought of giving criticism makes so many of us just squirm. We don't want to do it. We put it off. We avoid it. We beat around the bush. And the goal here, the goal of today is to make it much less threatening and to focus on giving criticism and doing it the right way for the right reasons, so that the next time you need to offer some helpful criticism to somebody, you're not ready to put a gun to your head.
Well, and Steve, you bring up a really important point, and that is, I think that the goal as leaders is to not be comfortable giving criticism. I mean, I don't think any of us gets up in the morning and says, oh boy, I can't wait to go to the office and go criticize my employees. I don't think we work that way. But the idea, it's not to be comfortable. What we're trying to do is be effective. And that's where the skill set comes in. Because as leaders, our words count. And I just got to make one quick comment. You know, Steve, we always talk about holding people accountable for what they do. What I think is so essential today in our business environment, especially among our leaders, is to make sure we hold them accountable for what they say.
For what they say?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Words matter.
All right. Speaking of words, in this politically correct environment, and I read yesterday, and I didn't have time to go back and research it to give specifics, but I read something yesterday where a certain college had decided they had removed the scales from the men's and ladies' exercise rooms in the college, because getting on the scales was causing some people stress. And I'm like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Yeah, my bathroom scales give me stress, but I don't throw them out the window. You know, so in this politically correct environment, Deb has run into a lot of people that say, well, maybe we ought to consider banning the word.
Well, that's right. And, you know, even in that Harvard Business article, one of the managers said that that the term should be banned from business and industry. And I've heard that, you know, among just in casual conversations. So again, we went out to all of you and said, do you think the word criticism should be banned? And as Steve is showing, overwhelmingly, you all said absolutely not. You see criticism very positively. For example, here's what almost 89% of you said, that criticism is linked to building exceptional performing teams, and you're absolutely right. You cannot have an exceptional performing team without the effective use of criticism. You said that criticism is linked to trust and respect, which is absolutely true, and it's also linked to improving performance. And criticism is a very powerful influencing tool, because criticism and change go hand in hand.
Well, you're absolutely right. And the two graphics on the bottom, the little bit, and then the tiny little tomato for a meal, put those on there to indicate that at the end of the day, everybody says they want it and need it, and yet the facts are there's so little training being given. And that's a whole topic for another webinar, in terms of chatting with our HR professionals and saying, there might be something you're missing here. So
Absolutely.
Let's move on and talk about some additional insights when it comes to understanding criticism.
Yeah, I think that we've been saying all along that criticism is rooted in negativity, and some people squirm at that, but you know, you can't escape it. And what we're saying here is that when you communicate to another person, you are communicating some degree of negativity. But Steve, maybe that's not bad, because you get a yin and a yang relationship. You got the positive praise, which you need to give as a form of feedback, and then you have the criticism that you need to give to someone. And we're calling it criticism because there is no other word in the English language. I have looked and looked. My editors and I have looked. There is no other word in the English language that can be used as a substitute for criticism.
That's a pretty powerful statement. I'm going to go ahead and ask Aiden if he will open up the microphones, because we've got a couple of questions. We thought we might just do this one somewhat rhetorically, but I think we're doing okay for time. So Deb asked me on the phone as we were preparing for this, she said, well, let me ask you, what would happen in the workplace if we could only praise and not criticize?
Absolutely.
Anybody want to offer an answer? Anybody want to chime in?
Okay, I'm going to open up the mics here. If you're in a conference room, please make sure to keep the background noise to a minimum. That includes typing and sidebar conversations. We're opening the mics in 3, 2, and 1.
So,
hey, Steve, this is Sean Doherty down in Fort Walton Beach.
Yeah, hi, Sean.
Yeah, you know, like in what we do, it just for this question, you know, if everything was hunky-dory, we'd never know when something was wrong, and that could cost lives, you know. So you have to be able to tell people that, no, you're not doing it right. It is not well done. You know, it's not fantastic. You really need to correct this. So that would never happen. But there's a lot of the bigger companies are not doing, I think General Electric is one of them. There are no annual performance reports. And a performance report is a critique, whether it be good critique or bad critique. And some of the larger companies are doing away with it because of this highly politically correct world that we live in.
Oh, I know Deb's anxious to talk to that one.
Well, we could go on that one. I just think that in our efforts to soften the term criticism, we're trying, I think GE is, what are they calling it, insights or something, and they're doing it on email. But you know, there's nothing more meaningful than to be face to face with someone and to have an open and honest dialogue. That's where trust comes in. And again, if I'm an employee and I'm working in your organization, remember, I can work in many organizations. If I want to learn and grow, criticism done well that's helpful is the most valuable way to help someone grow and learn. And remember, I think, as our caller Sean is saying, you don't have to go from bad to good. In other words, you don't have to be on, you know, a 90-day improvement plan. We're talking about people who are really striving to excel. They really want criticism because they know they have more potential, more to give, and they're looking for the leadership to give them that opportunity. And so I think that getting back to our question, the idea of criticism is essential because it can save lives. Absolutely. And that I didn't have that as one of my top 3. But you know, Sean is absolutely right. It's essential, and it could save lives. Saying nothing or trying to, as you say, Steve, generalize it or soften it, people may not get it. There may be an urgency, and you need to be clear and straight.
Yeah, so this is Kay Jernigan-Veers from Huntsville. And I guess to answer your question, if we only praise, I guess I view it as you will continue to get more of the same behavior. If you want behaviors to change, then I think you have to highlight what is unacceptable is probably a strong word, but what you need to have change. So to me, criticism done right leads to behavior changes, and that helps people, you know, you can say go from good to great or better to best, and so just the praise to me reinforces that they will continue all the behaviors that you're praising, but it doesn't really highlight to them the behaviors that need to change. So I think you have to have both, especially to see behavior changes.
Absolutely. Well, Kay, I'm just going to reiterate what Kay said. When you praise someone, what are you really telling them? And Kay said, you're doing a good job. This is what we're saying, and keep doing it. It didn't say do it at a higher level or do it differently. And with criticism, it's implied that you will change your behavior. That's why it's a great influencer when it's done well. And as an athlete who competed as one of the top 10 divers on platform that was 34 feet above the water, when my coach would criticize me, and he did, and he used words that would make a Marine during basic training cringe, but I got to tell you, I mean, it helped me because I wanted to achieve a goal. And all of us in business, like I coach executives all the time and senior managers, and they want to advance or they want to add more value in an organization where they currently are. And they thrive on that criticism because it gives them insights of what they can do better. So if you only give praise, you can set the level of performance that's less than desirable in a fiercely competitive global market, which many of us compete in. So that's 2 so far. Okay. What else? There's more if we're imagining.
Yeah, we got room for one more, and then we got another question. So anybody else want to jump in on this one? All right, then let's go to the fun one.
Well, let me just jump in real quickly, Steve, and just finish the thought here, because the other thing that happens is if I'm always praising you, are you going to trust everything I say? Especially if you come in the workplace knowing that you're not perfect. Many of us may think. There are a few that may think that way, but most of us don't. And if we have blind spots. So trust and respect begins to get eroded. And here's one of the things that I think, going back to Sean, with performance reviews, is if we're always giving praise to people because we think, oh, we don't pay them enough money, or I don't want to get into a hassle, so we're always praising people, what happens is we get these huge egos running around the workplace who have a very distorted view of who they really are and what value they really bring. And it makes a very difficult situation in that kind of setting.
Well, and you're right. And the other piece of this is these organizations that don't give performance reviews, and I've had more than one manager say, you know, if the company didn't force me to give them, I'd never give them. And the first time I heard that, I thought, oh, Lord, then how will anyone ever know? So especially if performance reviews are starting to get passé in your organization, then people have got to find more opportunities to have these important conversations with people, good, bad, and the ugly, and certainly that includes criticism. All right.
And Steve, and that's why, we're also talking about this is everyday exchanges. So
Yep.
This makes our webinar today and the need to be skilled in giving criticism even more important, because employees are looking, especially the millennials, they are really looking for how they can advance for tomorrow.
Absolutely. All right, and we're going to shift gears a little bit, but keep the mics open. And this is a question that Deb threw to me a while ago. And she goes, well, Steve, who is in control during a criticism exchange? So those of you that are in group settings, we're going to give you about 15, 20 seconds here, kind of look around the room and chat with yourselves and go, okay, who is in control? So we'll just kind of pat our toes here for a second.
I'm going to close the mics while everybody's chatting amongst themselves and reopen them in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
TJ.
Okay, Aiden, let's go ahead and open the mics.
All right, the mics will be open in 3, 2, 1.
All right, who wants to speak up and give us a possible answer to this question? Who's in control during a criticism exchange? First person.
Hey, Steve, this is Lynn with the team down at Boeingport, Huntsville, and I've got Yakeem here with a really interesting perspective.
Okay.
Well, we went through it. We went through the conversation and kind of started off with the one giving it, but actually, I think the one that is receiving the criticism actually has control, because it's up to them to ultimately either accept it or reject it and follow those consequences. So that's kind of like the mindset on that one. So.
All right. Anyone want to take issue with that or agree with it or have another answer to this question?
So we here in Marietta, can you all hear us?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. We said the same thing as the gentleman before us. The initiator comes in with the upper hand in the situation, and depending on how the conversation is directed, it can either stay the same or switch to the one receiving the criticism.
All right, one more. Thanks. Is that Alma? Thank you.
Yes.
All right, Deb, toss this one over to you.
Well, thanks, Steve. We've got a real smart audience, because they know, it's probably through experience, that they thought they had the upper hand in the beginning, only to find out it's the receiver in the end who ultimately has the control during that exchange. And just to elaborate on what everyone said, it's the receiver who can challenge the giver. And those are those tough conversations where they say, well, give me an example, and we get back and forth on those facts. The second thing is the receiver can agree or disagree with the giver. And what's most frustrating of all, as our Boeing and Marietta group were saying, is that it's the receiver who decides whether or not to do anything about it. And I think what's really important to keep in mind when we talk about everyday criticism exchanges, we're not just talking about performance issues. These are these casual exchanges where somebody turns around and says, something off color like, where'd you get that, crazy shirt? or, you know, so keep in mind that the little jabbing and the little conversations that are casual also have criticisms built into them. So it's not just all performance. Criticism is integral. So I just thought I'd throw that out to remind people that it's not simply just performance, you know, these serious conversations.
Absolutely. And I found this one. When someone criticizes, we must quickly discern if they're trying to help us or hurt us. And to me, this just spoke to the issue that, oh yeah, while you and I are sweating, providing criticism, giving it, the other person, 1,000 things are going through his or her head. And one of them happens to be, well, what's the intent of this? What's the purpose? Why is he or she saying it? Are they trying to help me or make me feel bad or belittle me or build me up? So immediately, you are losing control the minute the words leave your lips. And if it will help those of you who kind of thought it was the giver, well, guess who got it wrong? Or as Deb said to me, said we found the slide, she goes, I noticed you paused or pawed when I asked you that question, because it never dawned on me, and must mean I'm a narcissist, I don't know. I'm sitting there going, well, yeah, I'm the boss, I'm the leader, I'm in control. And Deb very quickly made me realize, guess again.
Absolutely. And when you said pause, I think what we want to make sure for givers, if nothing else, the most important thing you want to remember when Steve said pause is to pause, and because you want to think before you speak. Because once you open your mouth, the control shifts to the receiver. And you want to make sure what you're going to do is helpful.
Let's build on that and let's discuss, and Deb will lead this discussion. How do you connect with employees? And the word connect is important, which is why it's underlined and in red. How do you connect with people so that you make giving criticism more of a conversation and more of a motivational tool as opposed to a punishment or confrontation? So when I first did this slide, that was all that was on there. And Deb goes, why don't you add what the survey said?
Absolutely. And I think this is what's really amazing and why this makes us squirm and so uncomfortable, and what I think contributes to criticism's bad reputation is that really 67% of you reported receiving no training on how to give or receive criticism. I mean, this is really amazing. And you know what else was surprising is that 52% of you said that of the training we did receive, it was inadequate. And I think, to be realistic for all of our leaders today, Steve, we're just touching the surface on it and giving them a good reminder for many of them, and hopefully for others of you some ways to really refine your skills. Because it is a skill, and 87% of you said you believe it can be taught.
Absolutely. So the secret, and some of the secrets Deb's going to be sharing in a second, is to approach this always as a conversation, not a confrontation. And to that end, it's important that it be helpful, quality criticism. And I loved Deb's line. She said this when we were chatting one day, and I wrote it down, and it ended up on the slide. She said, well, you know, Steve, confronting doesn't have to be confrontation.
Absolutely. In other words, you are going to confront someone, but what typically happens is that some of us, if we wait too long, it builds and builds and builds, and then we get into this mindset that, that we've got to burst into this, and because you were so upset about it because we waited too long, and that's not the proper way to approach it, nor is having an attitude of I'm going to have, get into a confrontation with someone where I'm going to put my stake in the ground and I'm going to try to be right, and I'm going to make sure that I prove my receiver to be wrong. Because we make it a personal battle, and the attitude you want to go in with, it's a conversation, yet you will confront the person in the process.
And the hidden C in this slide is the word conflict. I know I share with Deb that I will avoid conflict at all costs. And,
that's right.
And that does not make me a good leader always, because conflict is not confrontation, and confrontation is not always criticism. You got to spread those apart. And Deb, I read reading in one of your blogs, excuse me, where you had said that a lot of organizations have programs, have HR comes up with, well, we're going to talk about conflict management. And that is way down the road for this.
Absolutely. And thanks, Steve, for bringing it up, because if you have conflict management, it's when it comes to really trying to be honest with someone, they're really not the same. Criticism and conflict aren't the same. The easiest way to describe the difference or how conflict fits in with criticism is that poorly delivered criticism results in conflict. So what we want to be doing when we're trying to promote open communications in an organization with candidness is really train people on how to deliver information that's rooted in negativity.
All right, well then let's get to some tips and insights. These are Deb's. Deb, I'll read the tip and then you can explain it, Lucy. How's that? So
okay.
The first one is, make sure that when giving criticism, you stop long enough to know what you want from the other person specifically.
Yeah, now this one has several really good elements in it. First off, we said you want to stop and think before you speak. Now, for it to be helpful, you need to know what you want from the receiver. The worst kind of criticism to give someone is criticism they can do nothing about. Let me give you an example. Again, we're in a casual conversation and just laughing and joking, and you just turn around to somebody and saying, oh yeah, I understand you went to University of Arizona. Isn't that a party school? See, all of a sudden, everyone may be laughing, including the person who went to the University of Arizona, but really they can take that because they're in control as a criticism. And so you want to make sure that when you're speaking that you're attempting to be helpful. And you want to be specific. In your own mind. If you don't know what you want from the person, then it's going to cause you to repackage your message, and that'll bring us to a new slide. Yeah, thanks, Steve. You and I were talking about how many managers, right, they talk in generalities. They'll turn around and they'll say, oh, you need to take more initiative. Oh, and the one I really like is, especially with my senior managers, is that you need to participate more in meetings. I don't know if any of you have received that kind of criticism. And so and what happens is the receiver, thinks they know what the boss wants, and so they go out there and make attempts to make some changes. And all of a sudden, if it's not what the boss had, then they are really set up for failure. So example might be is that you need to take more initiative. And so the person starts making some decisions thinking, okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward on this purchase, or I'm going to go ahead and agree to this plan. And then all of a sudden the boss comes back and says, what do you mean you went ahead and approved this? You needed to get it to me first. And the employee turns around and says, or manager says to the boss, well, gee, I thought you wanted me to take more initiative. So when we talk in generalities, we really can, without our awareness, be setting up an employee for failure or a team for failure. So you really want to be specific on what is it going to take to rectify or correct the situation or help the person improve, and that's what we're trying to do. And I also said, you got to watch out. Sometimes we get into this back and forth like a tennis match of, whether our facts are right, because we've all been taught to have our facts. And I think what we really want to make sure we do is have a conversation with our employees after our webinar today or our team and talk to them about criticism and saying, with limited time, we all want to make sure that with a level of trust and respect, that the intent behind criticism is to really improve things. And so can we put a little more time on focusing on the improvement?
Okay, great. I thought you were going to say, could we pull up the next slide? Sorry about that.
That's okay. No, that's okay.
I told him we didn't practice. All right, tip number 2, involve the receiver in the solution.
What we're talking about there is if you're going to have a conversation, remember the attitude is not to come in there you know, as a winner or as a loser, or, you know, this, you know, diametrically opposed scale that you're working from. It's a conversation because, you know, givers, we may not be right. We may not have all the facts correctly. So we're not there, you know, to have an argument. We're there to figure out how the individual can correct a situation or benefit, grow personally or professionally, or we're trying to undo a mistake. And so you want to involve the receiver in the solution. And just by simply asking them, what do they see that they need to do, like after a presentation, let's say, instead of saying to the employee, you know, you did this and this and this wrong, you didn't engage the audience, you didn't introduce your purpose clearly enough, or you introduced wrong facts, you could turn around to the employee and say, how do you think that presentation went? What would you do differently? And that gives you as a manager tremendous insights if the employee has any awareness of themselves, besides if they're really being honest with you, and if they come up with some really good suggestions as to what they could do differently. So involving the receiver, and you know, I just, Steve, it popped into my mind when with this next slide. I remember I had a hairdresser who owned his own salon, and he said, Deb, if I do all the talking, who's getting smarter? So it's the idea that when you ask the receiver, what you're doing is you're having a conversation. It puts on a conversational tone, and it says, I believe in you. You didn't say those words, but if they were stupid, you just tell them. So it shows respect, and it lets the employee know you believe in them, because a big part of criticism is making sure you also instill confidence in the employee, because we want to create independent and interdependent employees so that they can really pull their load and tap into their potential.
Perfect. Number 3, make sure that the receiver understands the value of taking action.
Yeah, I know. And you said, Deb, you know, what do you really mean by taking value, you know, showing value? I know, Steve, I know. We talked about this one. And what we're really saying, and this is a common mistake that many managers make, and that is they talk about what needs to be done, you know, to correct the situation, what they've done wrong, but they oftentimes overlook the benefit. Why should I, as a receiver, make the change? And so it's taking a look at what's the benefit for me to do something about the situation. And I asked you, and we thought it would be good to ask our audience, how do you deliver criticism so that the receiver sees it, if you know, as being of value? And you just gave the answer, because the only way you can do it that I'm aware of is to link back to what's important to the individual, their personal goals, or your goals, or the organizational overriding goals. And so I can give you several stories. One of them that's a famous one, this gentleman owns his own architectural firm, and he said, Deb, I'll never forget when I was working for IM Pei, a very famous architect. He said, I was going to be my own person, and I really prided myself in having, you know, come up with very creative and great ideas, but I also dressed very unprofessionally. He said, I just didn't have I just thought, you know, I didn't have to focus on dressing. After all, people aren't interested in my dress, and they want my ideas. But what happened was people weren't taking his ideas. They weren't listening to him because they were so taken back by how sloppily he was dressed. And so IM Pei said to him, he said, you know, instead of approaching him by saying your dress is just unacceptable in the workplace, he turned around and said to this young architect at the time, he said, you know, if you dressed more neatly and put on a clean shirt and a pair of pants, people would hear the great ideas that you worked so hard to put together. He said, I'll never forget how he approached me on that, because he said, I was a real rebel at the time and I wanted to be my own person. And he said, it just really caused me to pause. And of course, I changed the way I dress. other people, you know, if you, let's say lateness for meetings, that's a common thing that comes up. You know, if a manager turns around and says, all right, I've got my facts, you were 15 minutes late on, you know, on Monday this week, and you were 10 minutes late last week, you know, and you need to be on time for these meetings. Well, you know, that may not capture someone's interest. I mean, besides, meetings are boring anyway and nothing gets resolved. So a way to repackage that message, let's say respect is very important to this particular latecomer to a meeting. And so what a manager can do is saying, you know, gaining respect is important to you. And I just got to ask you, what message do you send when you come to our staff meetings with your peers 10 or 15 minutes late? What kind of message do you send, and how do you think that contributes to you gaining respect? So that's why it's so important to make sure you really know your people like you know your products. We really need to know our people, what their goals are, because then you can talk in ways that will get them to want to change. That's where criticism begins to become motivational. My diving coach, all I had to do if I was fooling around, you know, during a workout, all he had to do was say, do you think this is going to get you to the Olympics? And that was it, because I was the top 10 and I was seeded for the games. So that's all it took.
And that leads us straight into number 4, and that's delivering your message according to the preferences of each individual receiver.
Oh, yeah, Steve. This one's really important. And this is another one because, you know, we're so uncomfortable. So many of us do deliver criticism according to what's most comfortable for us. And I think we also are inclined to deliver it according to what's most comfortable for us because of your grandmother's slide. You want to show them grandma? Many of us have been taught to treat others the way we would like to be treated. Now, on one level, grandma is right, but on another level, this one gets you into trouble. And so what happens is when we treat others the way we ourselves would like to be treated, let's say you like to be direct and to the point. And Steve, that's the way you like it. Okay, is that true though? Seriously.
Pretty much.
You like it direct?
Yes.
Pretty much?
Yes.
Well, what would make you accept criticism easier if it's pretty much? This, by the way, is unrehearsed.
Yeah, it totally is.
Totally.
We're getting ahead about 3 slides. For me, it's tone. You know, this is why when you say it's up to the receiver having control, because I immediately make a judgment as to how you are giving me criticism. I'll gladly take it, but if I feel if it's a put down, then my defenses go up.
Oh, so you take a lot of place, a lot of emphasis on how. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? See, so that's something I learned about Steve that I didn't know. So, in other words, see, I would just, you know, go in there and, you know, and if I'm upset, oh my goodness, I could really turn you off in an instant. So
and remember, I have control of this computer, so don't go there.
So it's the idea of learning how best to approach it. And what Steve did is that he knows, and he proved to all of you that in the workplace, employees do know. And if we don't, here's what happens in the big picture. If we treat everyone the way we would like to be treated, what we're saying is that individuals are not complex. They can be, you know, you could just go step 1, step 2, step 3, and you just deliver it. And that's not true. People really do have preferences. And so what Steve also tapped into is that oftentimes it's not what we say, because people expect to be criticized. Right. In other national surveys we've done, we have found that employees expect to be criticized by their boss. The turnoff is how. Now, with treating others the way they would like to be treated or need to be treated, we're individualizing it, and we're avoiding, for us as givers, the need to tiptoe and dance around it.
Well, speaking of dancing, one of the things I found when we were putting this together was that, you know, there's a lot of stuff on the internet about sandwiching your feedback, your your criticism between two positive buns, for lack of a better phrase. And I know you basically hate this. So you want to take just a quick response to this slide?
Absolutely. And this one, I think our earlier responder, Sean, was talking about a critique. This more mirrors a critique than delivering criticism. And I would say to all of you, you want to use this with caution. Here's what I found, and I'll bet you it matches what many of you have found. If you always start positive, and then oftentimes what happens is the receiver doesn't hear the negative because they're glorifying in the positive. Or if you always start positive, for others of us, they never hear it because they're waiting for the big axe to fall down of the butt.
Yeah.
So again, if we want to be genuine and really say, when we say to an employee that you're important, or to a team member that you're important, that we need to individualize our criticism. Otherwise, we come across as formulaic, and we're not genuine, and we're really not taking a look at the uniqueness and the preferences, again, showing respect to individuals.
Which leads us to number 5, the importance of rehearsing your delivery, thinking through what it is you want to say.
Yeah, and you remember, you can do this in a flash. It works very quickly mentally, but you want to stop and think before you speak and make sure it's going to be helpful. We rehearse presentations where you want to rehearse mentally your delivery. And in my case, if I'm working with Steve, I would really want to make sure I'm watching my tone of voice. Oh, there you are, Steve. I would want to talk in a very matter-of-fact tone of voice. And one person said to me, one of the people I coach, they said, how do you do that, Deb? And one way to do it is by paying attention to your tone of voice when you are in a casual conversation. Then pay attention to your tone of voice when you're praising somebody. And then pay attention to your tone of voice when you're really upset. And you'll hear differences. And my diving coach was terrific. He just did it very matter-of-factly. It was like business. And it is true. Criticism is a part of doing business, just as is making mistakes.
Cool. Well, to capture all these tips and more, I'm asking Deb to give her communication chart.
Well, and thanks, Stephen. At first glance, all of you may, that, oh my gosh, what is this? But we wanted you to know that there really is a tool out there that works in all situations. It's what we talked about today is captured in this. This is, if we were to analyze what you think about to prepare your delivery, it includes everything. And to put it in a pictorial process form. And I guarantee you, if you follow every one of those diamonds and answer the questions in those diamonds, those of you that are familiar with flowcharts, I guarantee you your criticism would be received as intended, as helpful, and that the receiver is willing to act on it, and you will find your relationship is further strengthened because you really trust and respect each other. This isn't formulaic. It's what to think. It's not what to say. That way you don't come across as artificial or phony.
And most of you, we all got this PowerPoint presentation, and this is slide number 30 or 35. So you can print some out for yourselves and for other people. And so,
well, it's in my new book. It's a copyrighted. So if people want to distribute it, Steve,
oh, okay, thank you.
Please have them contact us, and then they can make some copies.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to let you know there's a tool out there.
All right. So winding up as we set the stage, it is setting the stage. And
yes.
I had a conversation about it, and it's like, all right, so you're delivering criticism. Well, there's some other little environmental factors here. Where do you do it? If you need to chat with someone, and it depends on the severity or the depth of the conversation. It might be in a conference room with the door closed. It might be in your office. It might be over lunch. It could be after work. It could be on a Friday afternoon, or you could kick off the week with it. You need to think through that, because where and when you do it. I know I'm not a big fan of sitting across from my desk from someone. My predecessor in this job, the 2 chairs across from his desk, you automatically sat very low. So every time you came in his office and he wanted to chat with you, he was higher than you were, and you really felt it, and it just totally was a mind bender in terms of environment. So you may want to just sit down side by side with someone. It might be maybe in 2 chairs in your office. It may be in a conference room, side by side, across from each other. Just think it through and what will work.
Absolutely, Steve. And that, again, is included in the flow chart because you want to ask yourself if the situation is urgent or not. And I think for many of you, unless it's a safety issue or if it's going to cost the company a lot of money or you may the customers in jeopardy, most criticisms are not urgent. So you really can take the time, as Steve and I are talking about, to set the environment and to make sure you're packaging your message in such a way that the receiver will understand that while no one is really comfortable giving or receiving criticism, we really need to give it if we care about this other person. And that's what criticism does. You also have there on the slide, Steve, what happens if. And of course, since the receiver's in control, they can get upset and can blow up. And so we want to take a look at if one quick little tip is if the receiver, starts to blow up. One of the things you can do is just simply pause as the giver and turn around and saying our purpose isn't being met here. And so you can say, can we just take a moment to reset? Or you can end the conversation and set up another time. In other words, make sure your purpose is being achieved. If not, then you want to reset yourselves or come up with another time where you can have a conversation if the conversation or the criticism at hand isn't urgent. If it's urgent, then you say, let's just get some water and take a break and come back because we really do need to work through this. So again, it takes good thinking.
And I think that really says is, at the end of the day, some people get it, that you need to be an encourager. And I love this little one. The world already has plenty of critics. I like the one down in the lower right. I think the criticism that I take to heart is from other writers that I respect. Some leaders don't. Some people approach it that it's just another free service I offer to idiots. I had to laugh when I saw this one. Or critics are men who watch a battle from a high place, then come down and shoot the survivors. That's not the way we want to do it. This is how we want to do it. And I'll make one comment and then let Deb kind of bring this to a conclusion here. Originally, this slide said, be the one who gives constructive criticism. And Deb said, I think I'd rather use the word helpful.
Well, what Steve is addressing is that a lot of us have been taught repeatedly that we need to use the term constructive criticism. And when I went to my publishers in New York, they said to me, no, as well as psychologists said the same thing, that it's an oxymoron, it cancels each other out. There is no such thing as constructive criticism. And so what we wanted to distinguish here is helpful from unhelpful or hurtful criticism. We want to make sure we stop and think before we give criticism to make sure what we're offering is helpful.
And speaking of helpful, Deb, I hope you don't mind, but I put your book back on here.
Oh, Steve.
It is available on Amazon, and I think about $17.95 in shipping. There's a Kindle available. What we want to do is, and if you can get in touch with me, if you want to get in touch with Deb, not a problem. We'll gladly connect you. What we want to do in the few moments we have left is have Aiden open the microphones and see if there are some questions, for those of you that can hang around for a minute, that you might, and I keep putting my cursor on the screen, sorry about that, some questions that some of you may have. So, Aiden, if you want to do your 3, 2, 1 thing.
Okay, we'll be opening the mics in 3, 2, and 1.
All right, comments from the crowd. Anyone?
This is Lori Allen from Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
Just wanted to thank you both. It was very helpful, and I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome.
Anyone else? You have a question for Deb?
Hi, Steve. Columbus 220.
Hi, Teresa.
Hey, how do you know me? Just wanted to thank you. We're sitting here not wanting to criticize. No, just kidding. Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Well, and you know what, I'll tell you, if you attended this seminar, this webinar today, people are going to wonder around you, what did you learn today? What did you do? And they're all going to get scared to death thinking that you're going to criticize them. And maybe it's a great window of opportunity to sit down and say, hey, here are some of the things that I did learn, realizing that it affects all of us, both on the job and off the job.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in? We still got almost everybody's still on the phone. Anybody got a question? Then I think we are at our maximum time. I want to thank everybody for hanging in for the full hour. Deb, you did a great job.
Oh, thanks, Steve.
I know.
No criticism. No criticisms, huh, Steve?
Well, if I get any, I'll pass it along. How's that?
Okay.
All right. Well, let's thank everybody, and we'll wish all of you a happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow and a nice weekend. And Deb, I will see you at 3 o'clock when we'll take this show on the road again and head west.
Sounds wonderful. And thank you all so much. Appreciate your taking the time out of your busy day to hear us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, for hooking around.